The ninth film in the MCU in the MCU in chronological order is actually the 10th film in the entire series, which is Guardians of the Galaxy, directed by James Gunn, co-written by James Gunn and Nicole Perlman. This movie tells the origin story about how one of the most obscure teams in Marvel comic books came together. So let's waste no time. Let's get right into it. Overall, Guardians of the Galaxy is a fun movie. I can say that nearly 10 years later, this movie still holds up at just being a fun ride. I think people have overrated the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie way too much. I don't think it's this be-all, end-all movie, but it is a very solid and very entertaining movie. Does that mean it's perfect? No, it has a lot of things that I just didn't really care for, particularly how James Gunn handled the villain of Ronan, who on paper and concept was very menacing and was being played really well by Lee Pace. But then when you get close to the third act, it all kind of falls apart. And take away a lot of Ronan's motivations, he's not really the most complex villain that there is. But what this movie lacks with an overall main villain, it does have a lot of good quirks and good quirks to it. And it does add to the overall MCU when you look at the grand scheme of things, because it's basically this movie's introduction in an entire team that's concurrent with the Avengers, and also telling the story of the Power Stone, which is one of the 6 Infinity Stones. So this movie does add a lot to the overall lore, but to James Gunn's credit, he didn't handcuff the Guardians of the Galaxy too much by being part of the MCU lore. He managed to make it parallel with it, but also tell us a completely independent story by having it take place in space, away from the main narrative of the MCU. And that's this movie's strong point, is that it's singular, is that it has a very singular focus. It's all about establishing the team of Peter Quill, Gamora, Groot, Rocket, and Drax the Destroyer. And for the most part, I think James Gunn did a really good job with this movie. I like all of the Guardians of the Galaxy. They all have their personalities and they all have their quirks, and I like every single one of them for a variety of different reasons. I like Chris Pratt as Star-Lord. He's a human-born. He's human-born, but was kidnapped by the aliens, particularly that of Yondu, played by Michael Rooker. I like Peter Quill as a character. I like how we see him as a kid and how he's struggling with the death of his mother, and his coping mechanism is pretty much music. This movie got a lot of praise for its soundtrack, but what many people tend to overlook is that James Gunn was smart enough as to integrate the soundtrack into the movie's narrative. Hence why the soundtrack to this movie was so good, because it's a part of Peter Quill's personality. Like, every song has a special meaning to him because it was introduced to him by his mom. And I like it. It adds a lot to Peter Quill as a character. And not only that, just Chris Pratt is just a fun actor. He's a really funny guy, and I like him as the character of Star-Lord Peter Quill. He brings a lot of quirkiness to the character. He brings a lot of charm and charisma to the character. It's like he's like a bumbling Indiana Jones in a way. Like, he's this scavenger, but he's not as hard-edged as Indiana Jones, and he's not as he's more goofy and lovable as opposed to Indiana Jones, who is more gruff and tough. So I kind of like it. He's an outer space Indiana Jones, and I like the relationships that he develops with his 4 other teammates. Like, he and Gamora have this understated romance that is slowly being teased and hinted at throughout the course of the movie. Not only that, Gamora is played by the very talented Zoe Saldana, and I really like the character of Gamora. I like how she's the daughter of Thanos, along with her sister Nebula, played by Karen Gillan. Thanos, by the way, does make an appearance in this movie in a cameo voiced by Josh Brolin, and this was just a tease as to how Josh Brolin was going to portray the character of Thanos, especially when you get to Infinity War. But he has a nice little scene where he's pretty much talking down to Ronan, and I like it a lot. Josh Brolin gives us a slight tease of what's to expect with Thanos, and I like how Thanos is introduced in this movie as more like an overlooker as opposed to an actual villain, because you want to save him for later. But we want to establish his presence now, so that way the Guardians of the Galaxy have their own connection to Thanos when they eventually team up with the Avengers. So I like all that. And of course, and now going back to Gamora, having Gamora being part of the Guardians gives it an extra oomph, because now Thanos is daughter has basically betrayed him and is now on the fight against him. But I like how Gamora is not wooed by Peter Quill. Like she's turned off by him, which I like, because it would have been too hokey if Gamora would have just fell for this man. Gamora has her own personal vendetta. She's trying to prevent Ronan and her father from getting their hands on this powerful artifact, because it could literally wipe out the universe. So I like it. She has her own little personal story. Plus, she has the rivalry with her sister Nebula, which gets more expanded upon in Volume 2, but it's set up here in Volume 1, and I like it a lot. Speaking of which, I like Karen Gillan as an actress. I like her as Nebula, but I don't really care for how she portrayed in this movie. She's pretty much just there as a third act villain, as a third string villain. But her development doesn't come till the second Guardians movie, which is where Karen Gillan really gets a chance to shine. But as an overall introduction, I like her in the movie, and I like the fight scene that Gamora and Nebula have in the third act, which is sister versus sister, and it's done really, really well, so I can't really complain. Like the actress, I like the character. It gets better as it goes on, but this was a nice introduction, even though I would have liked more hints and teases when it comes to Nebula's character. But I like it. Her story is more or less tied to Gamora and them being these rival sisters, mainly because Nebula was always jealous that Thanos favored Gamora more than her. So I like the whole sibling rivalry aspect. When it comes to Drax the Destroyer, played by Batista, I like the character of Drax. I like how everything you say to him, he takes it completely literally, and he has no self-awareness to him. And Batista played the role really, really well. But I also like Drax. I also like the personal story of Drax. Like, he's somebody whose family was killed by Ronan under the orders of Thanos. So he has a personal vendetta against both men. And I just thought Batista was a lot of fun in the role. I like the scenes where he takes everything so literally that it makes him come across as a dummy. But I also like the camaraderie that he develops with his teammates as well, and it's the forms of a real family. So I enjoyed it. Batista was really good, and he does have some good fight scenes here and there, and some good character interactions here and there too. But I gotta say this: my favorite of the Guardians has got to be Rocket, voiced by Bradley Cooper. I love the character of Rocket. Bradley Cooper is just a funny actor in general, and him being the voice of Rocket just gives the character such a personality, this asshole-like personality. But it's that asshole that you can't help but laugh with, not laugh at. And Rocket just has a lot of cool moments all throughout this movie, and his chemistry and his chemistry and interactions with his fellow teammates is also a lot of fun. And of course, when you have Rocket, you have Groot, voiced by Vin Diesel. Now, Groot can come across as a one-note character, but it's all in his facial expressions and his body language is what makes Groot also a good character by association. So yeah, and Groot also has his funny moments as well. But Groot is played more as this innocent, as this hulking tree with a childlike mentality. He comes across as innocent, and James Gunn did a good job at pulling it off. Yeah. So in terms of how James Gunn handled the team, he did it fairly well. It's like basically he took the template of the Avengers and he applied to the Guardians, and it worked. Not only did it work well, it worked really, really well. but you also have a very strong supporting cast. You got Michael Rooker as Yondu, who's the leader of the Ravagers, who is also the one that kidnapped Peter Quill when he was a kid and basically raised him. Of course, we get more of that story in Volume 2, where Yondu gets more fleshed out. But in this movie, I like Rooker as Yondu. I like how Yondu is more or less like that. Harrison is more like Indiana Jones, only a more anti-Indiana Jones. He's more villainous. He's out for profit. But I like how Yondu does have a soft spot for Quill. So he like, even though Quill is a pain in his ass, you can still tell that Yondu he does have his own sense of love for Quill, though it's very, very understated and it's not explicitly spelled out. But you can tell that there are certain scenes where he sticks up for Quill without actually having to stick up for him. And that's seen in this movie in certain scenes. Plus, he has his badass scene where he uses his magic arrow to kill a bunch of Kree enemies at the end. So you can't go wrong with that. Love Michael Rooker. Sean Gunn plays Kraglin. He's a supporting player. He's just there, nothing to say, really. He's okay. Then you have John C. Reilly and Glenn Close, who play members of Nova Prime. I like them in the movie. I think John C. Reilly as Ramen Day has a lot of funny comedic bits to it. I like how he makes fun of Star-Lord at the end, and then at the beginning, and then at the end he has a whole new line of respect for him because he saves his family during the Kree invasion of Xandar. So I like all that. Plus, John C. Reilly has some little hints of humor all throughout the movie in his scenes as well, so I can't go wrong. And of course, you got the legendary Glenn Close playing Nova Prime, who is basically the leader of Xandar. You know, she has her moments here and there. She's actually the one who reveals to Peter Quill that he's actually half human and half celestial. And of course, this story aspect gets expanded upon in Volume 2. Also, you know, Yondu makes a reference that he was originally hired to bring a young Peter Quill to his father, but he couldn't do it because, in Yondu's words, the guy was a jackass. So pretty much, James Gunn, he told a story, but he also planted seeds for what was to come in the second movie. Like, James Gunn had an idea of what he wanted to do for Guardians 2 by dropping hints of Peter's dad all throughout the film and in scenes here and there, mostly with Yondu and the fact that Peter's origin is of Earth and is of alien, and that plays into part in the third act, where the Guardians of the Galaxy come together to kill Ronan with the Power Stone. Now, speaking of Ronan, I thought Lee Pace. This is now in release order. This is Ronan's first appearance in the Marvel lore. But when you watch it in chronological order, this is his second appearance in the MCU. With his first being in Captain Marvel. Again, that's only if you watch these movies in chronological order, the way they're intended to be watched, in order to get a clearer picture of the MCU as an entire universe. Now, where I think in Captain Marvel he was underutilized, in this movie he was better utilized. I like the character of Ronan. I like this whole idea of him being this religious zealot who is bounded by the ancient ways of his people, and if you are to be destroyed, he's going to destroy you. I thought Ronan came across as a threat. I liked the performance. It was boom. Lee Pace gave him this booming gothic tone of voice to him. The whole look and stature of Ronan is menacing, and he does have a lot of scenes where he gets to show that off. Like his first scene is him killing a Zendarian crushing his skull with a hammer, and then in one scene he's getting into a verbal sparring match with Thanos and holding his own. Even when Thanos puts him down, you can tell that Ronan gets irritated by it. And then you have the whole prison break scene with the Guardians, which is actually a lot of fun, and I like that scene a lot. One of the best set pieces in the whole movie. That's where you actually get to see the Guardians be a team for the first time. But after that happens, Ronan goes to that prison and slaughters everyone there too. And then, of course, he starts the whole war on Xandar. So, even though Ronan does do some cool things in this movie, his character could have been fleshed out a little bit more. Instead, you basically get the face value of it, but you don't get enough extension with it. And that's a shame, because I like the character of Ronan. You could have done some more things with him, and he doesn't really go down much without a fight. Once the Guardians come together with the Power Stone, they pretty much disintegrate him, and he goes bye-bye. Like, I would have liked to have seen one more fight, but I do like the whole thing of Quill distracting him with a dance-off, going back to something earlier in the movie where he considers Kevin Bacon from Footloose to be a hero because he saved because he brought dancing to the world. So, you know, that was a nice little callback to something that was set up earlier in the movie, which I enjoyed. Speaking of which, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy, this movie also establishes the space colony of Nowhere, which is pretty much a mining colony inside a severed head of a Celestial. Guardians of the Galaxy set up the idea of these Celestials, which becomes an important factor later on in the MCU with the Eternals. This movie laid the groundwork for that, and also lays down the groundwork for Nowhere, in which the Guardians eventually own in the Christmas special. But Nowhere is also the home of the Collector, Tenelier Tiven, played by Benicio del Toro. Of course, his character was established at the end of Thor: The Dark World, which is why it's better to watch Dark World and then Guardians afterwards, because you get more expansion on it. So, like, the whole thing on Nowhere is also where the Guardians get to have more of a bonding process and also more of a splintered process, because after the Collector gives, like, his whole history of the Power Stone, his slave girl tries to take it, but she gets disintegrated. Then all of a sudden Ronan appears, kicks everyone's ass. And of course, the reason why Ronan appears is because Drax made a distress call to bring him to nowhere. So that way he can kill him. Pretty much, Drax is just out for himself and doesn't know how to be a part of a team. That's what causes the team to be splintered a little bit before they come together in the third act to officially take him down. So yeah, this movie, like I said, had a lot of good moments in it. It told an overall very good story, and it does have some emotional beats as well. Like I mentioned, I like the prologue with young Peter Quill having to see his mother die from cancer. I also love the sacrifice that Groot makes in order to save his team, because they're more than their team now; they're a family. And Groot made that sacrifice play, and the way they were able to make me feel for a raccoon crying over his tree friend sacrificing himself, very emotional. James Gunn is one of those directors that can make you feel emotion for trees and animals. It's good stuff. I like it. And just seeing Rocket just be totally devastated by the loss of his friend Groot is very understated. Very, very understated. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I really got to say about Guardians of the Galaxy. At the end of the day, I do really like this movie. I do like this movie a lot. This movie's a lot of fun. Like from the opening credits, which uses Come Get Your Love by Redbone, which is our first introduction to Peter Quill, which shows you that this movie's not going to be this dark and brooding movie. This is going to be a fun science fiction movie. And that's the biggest thing I like about Guardians, is that this movie feels like a superhero version of Star Wars, especially when you get to the third act. It feels so Star Wars, and I like it for it. I really like it for it. And I also like the end credit stinger with Howard the Duck. You know, that was a lot of fun as well. So yeah, do I think Guardians of the Galaxy is a perfect movie? No. A lot of the problems really comes from the villain being mostly underutilized and a couple of other things here and there. But do I think this is a fun movie and a good introduction to an obscure team, and you made me like characters I never heard of? Absolutely. James Gunn did a really good job at overall making the Guardians of the Galaxy a memorable movie and introducing characters that you care about and want to see how their stories continue as you go further along their journey. So with all that being said, Guardians of the Galaxy for me gets a solid 8 out of 10. I still very much thoroughly enjoy this movie, and this is truly one of the best MCU movies as well too. Do I think it deserves all the praise it gets? No, I don't. I think you overrated way too much, but I do genuinely like this movie. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for Guardians of the Galaxy. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.